Hello, folks. Welcome to Unfinished Legacies Men of Color Edition. This is episode 4. Today we're going to be talking about perceptions of masculinity, particularly just thinking about media and our families and socialization and kind of how that's led to how we understand these ideas of masculinity. What does that really mean, right? But before we get into that, we'll reintroduce all of ourselves. So my name is Brian Palomo. I'm a senior coordinator in mentoring at the Thrive Center. Excited here to chat with you all. So we have.
I'll go next. My name is Fred Huang. Back at the podcast again. Senior coordinator for financial wellness. I use he, him pronouns. And excuse the mask, but I was getting over a cold.
I can go next. My name is Luis Cruz. I'm an undergraduate student here at the University of Arizona. I'm currently studying computer science, and I am a front desk assistant and a peer mentor here at the Thrive Center.
And my name is Jacob Shirley. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the senior coordinator for the New Start Summer Program in the Thrive Center.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I also forgot to mention I use he, their pronouns. Pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for Phoebe behind the scenes running the show. Director Phoebe. Snaps. So I got a couple questions here. I've been contemplating in my head what order I really want to go in. Honestly, I think the best way to really start the conversation is for us to just think back. So we're talking about masculinity. We're talking about kind of like how we perceive it and how we've been socialized within it. So like just thinking back, what comes to mind as we think about growing up, the men in our lives, like what were we taught about masculinity? How do you feel like that's kind of led to now how you perceive it? I don't know. That's kind of not an exact question, but I feel like that's clear enough. Just essentially, like, what have the men in your lives, particularly growing up, really taught you about masculinity? Like, what comes to mind? Yeah, I think it's
a loaded question.
It is a very loaded question.
Maybe not a loaded question, it's a tough question.
True. It is very tough, but it's a good one to start out with.
The timing is great though, because I saw a post on Instagram recently, and it was one where straight men were asked to list things that they were not allowed to do because they would be perceived as gay or effeminate. And just the most absurd things were coming up. Like multiple times somebody said, I was told that I shouldn't eat salad because it's effeminate. Soup also came up in that list too.
I saw that one too.
Those are the ones that stuck out to me. Also, using an umbrella when it's raining came up a couple of times. Like they should have just like toughed it out or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I've seen one on like Twitter where they had like it was like a whole list of like basically that like women would make like somebody was making a list of like all the tweets where women were like, oh, this guy gave me like the ick for like whatever, and it was like ordering dessert or like wearing flip flops, like what I mean, it was like a bunch of like really absurd. Drinking a light beer, I think, was one of them. It's just like okay, oh my god, which is really interesting because I've been trying to like think back. Like when I think about this question, I think at least for me, I don't think a lot of the things that come to mind for me were necessarily taught explicitly, which is probably similar for a lot of people. But I guess like the thing with like when I think about my dad and like his generation versus like his dad, there's definitely like a very clear where like he was trying to like as much as he could like be different or like better related to that, but he wasn't like able to the point, especially as I was growing up, to really fully express that. And then there was just things that he like saw and learned growing up that would come out, if that makes sense. Especially like the biggest thing, I think the one that's really obvious that always comes up is like being able to like show like emotion and like affection and whatever. Which like now that he's older and like things have happened in our lives, in terms of family and loss and grief and different things, it's like opened that up more. But it's like that's like one thing that also showed up is like that. And the other thing too that I think is fascinating that I was reading and watching things about too is like I have like pretty bad like anxiety and my ADHD, etc. And like that came from somewhere. And like just from watching him growing up, it's like pretty obvious where it came from. But I also learned that anxiety like manifests very different in men in our society versus like in women because of like just exactly what I was talking about. And so like when men have anxiety, oftentimes it shows up in like aggression or like different things of that. I don't know, I'm kind of like talking in circles, but I guess it's really just like it's like interesting thinking back that like he definitely like felt from his childhood he was like really trying to be different, but it's like it feels like it's almost like it has to be like a multi-generational like you can't just like flip a switch and like everything's like great, right? Because I have like, plenty of things that I need to work on, which we'll probably get into. And so it's like, how do we just continually build? Because I feel like my dad wasn't like I've seen some clips or like heard from people where their dad was like very like just saying super out of pocket stuff, which I feel like I never really had that experience. So
My dad was pretty well, since I come from Hispanic like background and culture and stuff like that, my dad was really big on like macho man and stuff like that. I wouldn't say like he was emotionless, but definitely suppressed a lot of his emotions growing up and stuff. It was pretty rare to like ever see him cry, ever see him like show any sort of weakness or anything like that. He always he was like, I have to go do this outside because I have to, because it's part of my job. Like I have to do this and stuff like that. So for me, I didn't really have like any like major restrictions growing up and stuff like that. I had like the classic like no earrings, no painting nails, and stuff like that as like a male and stuff. But it was never really like anything super drastic, I guess. I was not always super masculine. I never like pushed myself towards those ideals and stuff like that. So my dad always questioned me growing up and stuff like that if I was like gay or anything like that. And it's kind of funny to me too, just because I was clearly not, but my dad, since I wasn't like super overly masculine and stuff like that, where I wanted to like go out with him and help him build something or work on the car if he needed some help with like that. Sometimes I showed a little more emotion than like he did, so he saw it as like feminine and stuff. It was just a mixture of things. And then one time, the one that like stands out to me the most is when I wanted to shave my mustache when I was younger, because like back then I didn't want it and stuff. And so I told him that I didn't want it anymore, and he like flipped out on me, telling me like, why would you ever get rid of it? Like you're supposed to have it. You're a man. You're supposed to keep it. Why would you want to get rid of it?
Yeah.
And then that day was like kind of like an eye opener to me that like there was like serious masculine problems with like me and my dad. And then eventually we kind of like talked it out. He was able to accept the fact that I didn't want it. And ever since then, he's kind of been more accepting of just what I do and stuff. Instead of like judging me off my characteristics, he judges me off like my accomplishments and stuff.
So any thoughts?
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. I think thinking about the idea of like machismo showing up in my family as well. So I identify as gay, and growing up, I think there were a lot of signs that I faced that wasn't okay. Like I got a lot of, before I came to terms with it, there were just a lot of messages that I would receive about, like playing the saxophone or like doing anything artsy. Like there was always a lot of like, why do you do artsy fartsy things when you should be playing sports? Like that was the big thing, is why don't you play sports, right? And then I remember there was a time where like McDonald's or Burger King had like Disney themed toys, and I got a Happy Meal. And there was like a little like Cinderella toy that I got, and I was like all excited about it, and I wanted to keep it. But I was told like, no, like you don't play with that. Like if it was Prince Charming, you could have the Prince Charming toy, which a Prince Charming toy would not have made me straighter, by the way. But those are just things that I remember growing up. So.
I'm struggling. I'm thinking about my past and like my experiences. I didn't get a lot of direct, like, this is how a man's supposed to act from my father, for instance. I mean, there was definitely behaviors like lack of intimacy or emotion other than anger, affection, all of that was like severely lacking in our family. But there wasn't a whole lot of like, you don't do that because like that's not what men do or anything like that. But what's funny, or maybe it's not funny, I don't know why I said that, not in a ha-ha sense. But it's funny in that, in like a it's not funny kind of a way.
Okay.
But like I think that part of it, like being an Asian man in the U.S., I think there's like a lot of like, I don't know, stereotypes of us like not being particularly masculine. So I think that a lot of my not expectations but ideas of what masculinity is really came from like media and like from friends and from like my experiences growing up in the U.S. So I was like almost compensating for the fact that like I'm an Asian guy, so I don't grow a lot of facial hair. You know what I mean? Like now I gotta act a certain way so everybody knows that I'm a guy. Like that, I think like that was sort of more influential to me maybe than like my familial experiences, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, and I kind of relate to some of that too, because like I said earlier, I didn't really feel like a lot of the like outwardly expressed kind of pieces, because like I said, I really did feel like, I felt like my family was at least trying to be open to me as I tried different things. It was like less about like going into a specific career versus really it was more like finding one that like makes good money, which then I worked in education, but like but they really try to push me to be like a doctor, engineer, whatever. But I do remember, and my parents still have kind of like baby, like my nieces have been born, and like everything's got to be pink, or like her mother-in-law bought her like a little like toy like kitchen set, things like that. And then like my sister has been like, because like it's just complicated, right, having that relationship. But luckily her dad is like, my brother-in-law is like the complete opposite. He's like he loves working on his cars, things like that. So he's like buying her things that I guess traditionally you'd think of as more for like boys. So she's got like kind of both going on. So she loves like really cool. But it is interesting how they like subliminally kind of like pass a message in some ways. But yeah, thank you everyone for sharing. I think you bring a good segue though of something else that I was kind of curious, because I also agree on the media pieces. So I was kind of curious just thinking about that, like how we feel, or like what we feel the media has really taught us about masculinity. Because like personally, I love movies and TV shows, like, and I know personally some of y'all have watched a lot as well, or even books, magazines, video games, whatever it really may be. But like kind of what comes to mind to that, because I feel like a media portrays a really strong image, and how that's kind of like tied to how we've learned and perceived ideas of masculinity. So does anyone have any thoughts come up about that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's changed a lot. Like ever since I was like young. I know I'm significantly younger than all y'all, but
Thank you.
like what's it called? I don't mean it like that, but obviously since I grew up not too long ago, everything. My bad. All right. Yeah. So when I was growing up, I definitely feel like it was a lot more different than it is now. Definitely there was a big emphasis on being masculine when I was younger. Like, I had to like play sports when I was young and stuff like that. And I did enjoy sports, but it was never really something that like stuck with me as a kid and stuff. And like I had to go always help my dad with stuff, or like the whole gender roles in the house and stuff like that, where it was like I helped outside, I cleaned outside, took out the trash, and then my sister and my mom would stay inside and like clean the room and stuff. It was definitely like a difference than what it was before than it is now. Like nowadays, definitely in the media, I see that like it's like a mixture, like where it's accepted to not be super masculine, but then there's also like certain labels and stuff where sometimes it isn't accepted, or it is. Like it's just depending on what like I'm seeing, like especially on TikTok and stuff. I definitely see a lot of mixture of like girls saying that they appreciate a man who is really masculine and stuff like that, and then there's mixtures of girls saying that they don't care as to what type of man they are, they just care how they're treated and stuff. I definitely feel like it's changed a lot ever since I was a kid into now it being a little more accepted, but there's definitely still some flaws in acceptance and stuff. Like at barbershops, I feel a little intimidated at barbershops when I go, just because I feel like there is like that's an environment of like over masculinity sometimes, kind of. I don't know. It's like a weird feeling, I guess, to say the least. It's definitely where I feel the most like intimidated, I guess is the word.
It makes me think about the movie too.
Barbershop?
Yeah, because it kind of is a space where they're like super like I don't know, just men being men.
Mhm.
And like I don't know, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in the 90s.
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
Now I'm thinking, you know, like perceptions of masculinity and thinking about movies. I mean, we're talking like Terminator and Die Hard and like
Yeah.
Rambo. I mean,
Yeah.
like so like over the top masculinity, Conan the Barbarian and things like that. So I think that some of that was like so like fantastical, if that's a word, that you're not really thinking like I'm gonna grow up and become like He-Man.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You know, like, yeah, I'm gonna come to work
Yeah.
wearing like a loincloth or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that there is like, you know, like as a kid that's like what you see, and then even like comics and cartoons and stuff. I do think that the like not perceptions, like the portrayals of masculinity in film and TV now has like evolved drastically, but I also think about all of the pushback that happens, like folks just out there forget the name of it, but where they like go and just like post negative reviews before like the movie's even out and things like that. So I think that it's still very much like, as much as folks seem to be trying to push the boundaries in a way that I appreciate and think that is the right move to make, I think there's obviously plenty of folks who do not appreciate that still. So I don't know, it's an interesting thing to like sort of see, kind of like what you were saying, Luis, of like some people being like very much like, yes, let's progress and let's move forward, and other people are like, no, we need to like lock down to these traditions, and everything that's happening is like anti or whatever.
Yeah, that makes me think about like Marvel right now. Like when the Marvel universe started in like 2008 or something. A lot of the first movies were very, you know, like heteronormative, and a lot of the protagonists were very like dude bro, you know, Tony Stark, you know. But over time, you know, like the most recent thing we had was Agatha All Along, where it was, you know, like 5 or 6 women and a gay teenager who were the protagonists, and it was like this groundbreaking thing for Marvel, that it kind of like shifted the makeup of the protagonists, which was empowering to see. And there's been a lot of that pushback that I've seen online, where the people who are like, oh well, you know, like why did we have to go woke with Marvel all of a sudden when those are like how the characters are actually portrayed in the comics, and so it's this whole thing.
But even then, like the portrayal of them in the comics versus like then versus now, right? So that's like not a evolution or an adjustment on the character to like fit modern times. These are characters created for like now to reflect what's happening now, versus like, I don't know, Captain America that was created back in who knows when. That was very much like, this is what we expect like from men these days. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to see folks like latch on to that for such a long time, and then like now that there's change, it's like, no, we need to hold on to this like portrayal that has been around since like the Cold War or whatever.
Yeah. This is a bit of a transition, but when I think about media, I mean, what was coming to mind for me was like when I was watching TV growing up, just thinking about what was on the TV, and it was always your very heteronormative, as you mentioned, your nuclear family, the dad worked, mom didn't, you know, like the first one on the top of my head is just like George Lopez. You know, when I was younger, I watched the show all the time. But that's just generally like archetype, you know, like it goes beyond that. I'm blanking right now, but there's just, you know, like there's tons of shows that fit into that mold. Especially like when you go like 90s or 2000s, like sitcoms, or it's like the other way where you get into like another one that popped up for me was like Fresh Prince. I watched a ton. I love this show. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. But there's like this very, like that's a good example of like kind of like the dichotomy of masculinity, right? When you get you know, Will's character and Carlton, and like how they, you know, and like Will's your very like stereotypical like player, like smooth talker, like whatever. But even Uncle Phil is like very stoic, strong, big. Like he's actually your probably most stereotypical masculinity, and Will kind of represents a little more like getting into like newer form, and then Carlton obviously, and there's a bunch of like racial things that come up as well. But I feel like the other thing is like the womanizer, which then leads to like the last show I really thought about, which was like Johnny Bravo.
I was just thinking about that.
Right.
I was just
you might be this is age showing up. I'm actually surprised you know John Bravo. But he's like huge, muscular. He's got like this like blonde, slick back, and he's just like super like stereotypical, like masculine, like over the top womanizer, like just flexing all the time. Like, it's actually pretty grotesque. I'm surprised.
How was that made for kids? Right?
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? It was made for kids, and so like kids are watching this, and then so it's like a whole thing. But I guess like my point being is that like I hadn't like that's I feel like where like a lot of things that you end up like not purposely, but you end up kind of internalizing some things that you don't realize until you're older. Until you go to therapy or work through things. It's just like have things that you internalize that you don't really realize are there because they're more subtle. There's like subliminal kind of messaging that comes up with that.
Something that you just said made me think of this concept of like masculinity. We usually think of it like masculinity versus femininity and these like two opposite sides of the spectrum. But when we were talking about Carlton, I was like, Carlton is kind of portrayed like as childlike, right? Like corny and like a little kid.
Yeah.
And in that sense, just like making fun of, like making jokes about his lack, quote unquote, lack of masculinity, but it was based more on the fact that he was like childlike. You know what I mean? So I was wondering, I don't know, like I'm just thinking about like, okay, so maybe there's something along the lines of masculinity of like, or perceptions of masculinity being like very much like adult and stoic, like you were describing Uncle Phil, versus like innocence and full of wonder and like allowing to feel joy and things like that.
Yeah. It's interesting.
It shows like it's like a sign of like weak, I guess, kind of thing, like the child thing. I guess you can consider it as like weak or just not strong. I guess I don't know, like lack for a better term, but just like he was a little more like, what's the word? Like I get childish, I guess, and so I guess they make fun of it for it because he's just not like strong and masculine and like leader kind of thing. I guess I don't know. I have not watched it in a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I at least watched it.
That's funny. But yeah, and then like we've started to see some transitioning away from that, where like not every show has to be that like stereotypical kind of nuclear family, working man, stay-at-home wife, whatever. But I don't know. We are in kind of a weird transition time right now too. Of like, just when I think about media, right? Like, there's also social media and kind of the realities that are getting pushed on there as well. And I think that's the tough thing right now is that young people are so impressionable. So there's a lot of like things getting pushed in social media that are kind of like trying to swing it back in like the other way in some ways, which is like kind of fascinating as well. And like there's like this almost like romanticization. Did I say that right? Of like this like traditional lifestyle or whatever, which is to me like really interesting because it's kind of like pitting them against each other. But I really personally think like there's, I mean, it gets complicated, right? Because there's like definitely like very harmful aspects of how you may do that. But I think a big part of like how I perceive a lot of pieces, I would say too, is like allowing folks to kind of, as long as they're not harming others, like what it feels kind of like right for you, right? Like if you want to live that life where you're kind of the breadwinner, so to speak, or if you prefer more that egalitarian, I guess, kind of like approach. Like there's no like necessarily correct way, as long as, which again, this is a whole other thing related to masculinity, but there's communication around things, right? And that you come into a conclusion and create a partnership, right, with whomever that you're working with. Like there's things that work for everyone. I feel like we're constantly trying to push people into like specific archetypes. Like we're like trying to say like this is better or this is better or this is better, versus allowing more like a fluid, of like what feels right for people, which is like ironic for such an individualistic society. But I don't know. is interesting.
Something Luis said was you mentioned about like leadership or like this expectation of strength, and it reminded me and related to what you brought up as far as like social media and online presence and stuff. Is it reminded me of like this concept of like the alpha male. And actually, I think Luis, you might have been the person that teach me what Sigma means.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. That changed my life. But yeah, these concepts of like what it is to be like a real man that is like kind of made its way into like kids these days are talking about. Whatever. But yeah. And this concept of Sigma was really interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like somebody that's like even beyond alpha. Like not even a leader, but they don't even need anybody to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, that sounds really unhealthy. Sounds like a lonely person.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's funny. That does sound lovely.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like an actual thing though. It could just be like obviously it's like joking behavior and
Yeah.
stuff, but there's definitely like a little bit of truth to it for sure. I don't think it's like that bad per se, but the term has definitely been changed, I guess, to say the least. I don't know if it's like a good thing or bad. Like it could be that like we're fighting against masculinity and trying to joke around it and stuff like that. Word has definitely changed, I guess, to say the least. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, thank you everyone for sharing and your insights. I think we'll be wrapping up soon, so you take some time for some like concluding thoughts. So I would say just anything that's kind of like sparked in your brain, or I think just in general, I'd also just be curious if you have anything to share in terms of like your personal relationship with masculinity, or maybe insights that you want to share for folks that are kind of out there, or maybe even like any work that you've done to try to like have a healthier relationship to masculinity as well. Closing thoughts.
I think the thing that I always go back to, with particularly from the perspective of like being in education, working with students, many times students of men identifying students of color, is this concept of like the level of vulnerability, courage, or courage to be vulnerable that it takes to ask for help, right? So I think that, I don't know, it sounds so simple to just be like, why don't you just ask somebody for help? But it's like a really difficult thing to do. And even going back to like talking about hyper independence, like, and it's something that I struggle with too. Like if I'm like in the weeds and somebody's just like, how can I help you? Just like, get off my back, or whatever. I just think it's this barrier that really, really is difficult for folks to get past. Or, so I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just think that every time we talk about these concepts of masculinity, like, that's where my mind goes right away. It's just like this unwillingness to like ask for and receive help.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think growing up like with George Lopez's show, where he's always like, I got this, right? Like, that was definitely a saying that I always had, like, I got this. And I was really unwilling to admit when I didn't know the answer to something, or I didn't even know what question to ask, right? And so that was a behavior that I had to learn, is, sometimes I don't got this and I need to speak up and, know who's in my corner when I don't know who the questions to ask, who can I, learn from, and just kind of be in that space. So.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge thing, right? I mean, it's kind of the thing that always pops back into my head, as well as we talk about all these ideas of masculinity and what it means to be a man, and how we perceive that, and then how we act based on that, and these ideas of stoicism and being strong and all that, not asking for help. I mean, at the end of the day, is clearly not helping us, right? Like we can't argue with the fact that when it comes to being going for retention rates at like a university, right? For students who are coming here for their first year and being able to come back for their second year, and a color of the lowest rates, like by far, right? Like there's no arguing that in terms of graduation, the numbers are the same, right? And there's still like obviously a lot of factors involved with that, but I mean a big piece is definitely related to just becoming connected, asking for support. Right, like myself, I was able to figure it out, particularly with help from some folks that I met, like TJ. Right, always comes back to TJ. who I met as an undergrad when I was on academic probation, but I kind of had to get pulled there by my RA. Like I didn't like go and seek help. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have finished, my undergraduate degree, let alone like, be like continuing on and be working on like a PhD now, etc. Right? Like it's like that was like a big turning point for me. I'd be in a very different position, but it was really my like stubbornness and like asking for help and all those kinds of things. So like, we gotta be vulnerable, right? Like I think it's not easy, but to me, like at the end of the day, that's the biggest lesson to take from a lot of these pieces is that like what we're seeing on TV, what we're seeing in movies, what we're generally being passed from like previous generations, and particularly culturally, being men of color, right, are not always the healthiest pieces, and we need to really continue to work to fight back. It's not going to be easy, right, but we need to keep having those conversations. Because at the end of the day, the numbers really don't lie, right? What we're seeing.
I definitely still struggle with it to this day as well. I've also been very stubborn my entire life. I've kind of just told myself that I can do it. Like, I can do it myself. Don't worry. I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. And that honestly kind of just like stems off my dad, because my dad has always been like that too. Like, even if no one's there to help him, he's always like, I don't need help. I can do it. And thankfully, no plug, but I definitely have been able to like receive help here, like especially at the Thrive Center when like I received scholarships and stuff like that. I never really considered the idea of like receiving help. I kind of just told myself I'll learn college as I go, but definitely realizing that sometimes I do really need a support system, or I need someone there to at least guide me or teach me certain things that I don't know about, because there's no shame in asking for help sometimes. I'm only one person. I can really only know so much about certain topics. So I definitely improved on it, like here at the center and like with friends and professors and stuff, but it's definitely still something I need to work on moving forward and stuff, because I can be pretty stubborn on how much I ask for help. So sometimes I need to like sit back or like take a step back and tell myself, okay, am I really making any progress on working on this by myself, or learning this by myself? Or would I benefit more from actually talking to somebody and asking for like guidance or redirection? Yeah, I hope in the near future I can definitely still begin to improve on it. Hopefully.
And you will, right? It's not a linear process. It doesn't happen overnight, right? Like we're so much older and we're still working on it.
Of course. Yeah.
From your words.
So much older.
But yeah, no, thank you for sharing some results. Yeah. Anyway, thank you everyone for your words of encouragement, passion.